Hey guys, today I'm going to run through how you can use AI to build an outbound sales agent for yourself for about $50. Some caveats to that, depending on what infrastructure you have in terms of, enriching leads and that sort of thing, but you can do this for less than $50 if you're on a budget. And the main kind of brain of this, what I'm going to use is something called OpenClaw, but you can use Claude for this as well, or even ChatGPT nowadays, I think, can do most of this functionality, but Claude can definitely do it. The reason I use OpenClaw is it's just something I started using a few months ago. It's kind of a semi-autonomous AI agent that can run, and it can wake up on a schedule and do tasks and stuff. So if you have something where you're completely not in the loop, it can be a bit nicer than Claude, because Claude is mostly used when you're actually the one kind of triggering the actions. So obviously, based on what I'm going to run through here, you'll see why it makes sense to use something like OpenClaw as opposed to kind of out of the box Claude. Yeah, cool. So what we're going to cover is what OpenClaw is, the infrastructure that we've deployed it on, the tools that it connects to. You don't actually need my exact stack, and then the importance of still having a human in the loop to review things, because you don't want AI go off and sending tons of emails and LinkedIn messages completely unchecked to people, obviously, burning through all your leads. And then basically just teaching it to write and what the pipeline looks like. And effectively what we're doing here is we're basically taking all our ingested data on customers. So customer sales calls, their buyer journey with us, all the firmographic information, the demographic information, the job titles, all that interesting sales data. We're going to pass it through an AI agent, and then out the other side, we're going to get things like emails going out on or outbound mail to. So I use Instantly. Hey Reach is what I use for like outbound LinkedIn campaigns, but you can use your own tool there, obviously. And then we log it all back to our CRM as well, without us having to do too much work. And then also, bonus, you can swap out Claude, which I used for a lot of this, for some cheaper models that can make it 10 to 20 times less expensive to run on a regular basis. So yeah, real quick, OpenClaw. So OpenClaw is basically a worker that never sleeps, is how to think of it. It wakes up on a schedule. It basically does things for you, outputs them, and goes back to sleep. So we have one deployed on a server that costs like $12 a month. It's super affordable to deploy. It's kind of complicated to get set up out the box. But all these cloud providers, so we use something called Hostinger, but like all these cloud providers have this kind of one-click OpenClaw install. So even if it sounds a bit daunting or scary, it's actually very easy to set up for a non-technical person nowadays, and it can work better than Claude for specific things, kind of like this. And you can still plug it into Claude as a AI brain if you want it to kind of still have as good reasoning as Claude. So yeah, basically what it runs on. So Hostinger is the name of our cloud provider that we service on. Like I said, they've got a one-click install. So I think that costs $13 a month instead of $12 a month or something, but like it's very affordable. And then set up a little Cloudflare tunnel as well, just called like a VPN tunnel, so that it just gives us a bit of protection and allows this to connect to some of our internal systems without us being worried about the big scary internet. Once again, Claude or OpenClaw can just set this up for you if you just ask it to, right? So you don't need to be technical to do that. Yeah. So essentially what we do is we have it hooked up. So we use something called OpenRouter as our actual model provider. So I initially set this up with Claude, and Claude is obviously amazing, but it's relatively expensive, especially if you have this thing running 24/7. So I think I spent something like $150 in a few days of Claude kind of setting this up and just it running itself. And then I switched over to a model from China called Mimo 2.5, which is basically it's about, I think, 13 times cheaper than Claude for every token that you process. So it just means instead of being $240 a week, it's $24 a week. There's a bunch of models you can use to kind of flick in and out of there. This OpenRouter basically is a way that you can, without getting too technical about this, it's a way that you can kind of use any AI model. It's super easy to integrate. Once again, you can just ask Claude or ChatGPT how you do this, and it will just be able to essentially just set it up for you in one go. Lots of people see this will be familiar with Apollo, which we use for our lead enrichment. We also use Hunter as a waterfall for emails from Apollo if Apollo can't get the emails. Apify is a bit of web scraping. I'll cover why we use that in a sec, but essentially what you'd want to do is to make these less generic, you want to try and get a unique bit of data, same as any sales outbound, a unique bit of data about your customer that you can kind of reference in an email tool. We use Apify for that. Instantly is our outbound email tool. Hey Reach is what we use for outbound LinkedIn. Atio is our current CRM. And then we use PostHog for our product analytics. So that's actually how we track new users. So every time a new user signs up, they get entered basically into this pipeline where we find a bunch of lookalike users using Apollo. We enrich them with Hunter. we go off and what we actually scrape is their LinkedIn feeds, right? So we basically scrape how often they've been posting on LinkedIn to figure out if they're going to be receptive to us as a company. I probably should have covered this at the start, but my actual business is we've built is Coso AI. So we Coso.ai, and we basically built a social media marketing agent. And effectively what that does is it creates social media content for businesses. So instead of paying an agency a couple $1,000s a month, pay us a couple $100s a month, and we do 99% of what the agency does with our own AI agent that we've built over the last couple of years. So obviously, if I do Outbound for that, it makes it way less generic if I can say, hey, you posted 3 times last month on LinkedIn, why don't you post 10 times next month? And that's kind of like our sales pitch, right? It's like, no extra work for you, you get way more content. So that's kind of why we scrape Amplify. But obviously, whatever business you're working in, there's going to be an equivalent of that, hopefully, where you can find, whether even if you're doing stuff like searching for kind of interesting news articles to reference in your outbound, or whatever kind of you would run on a sales outbound anyway for your business, you can probably find some way to scrape that automatically and ingest it into this pipeline. And yeah, they're getting the outbound done then. So yeah, what's kind of interesting about this is the only thing that's actually uniform here that you have to use in this case is OpenClaw. Obviously, like we said, you can actually swap that out for Claude and stuff if you want to. But some sort of data enrichment. So I use Apollo Hunter and Amplify, ZoomInfo, Lusha, Clay, Ocean. There's obviously a bunch of tools, whatever your data enrichment is. And you're outbound, so instantly hey reach. And obviously our CRM, in our case, we don't use Granola or something like that. We just use Atio as our CRM, which does call recording. So that stuff gets fed back in here as well, alongside the actual data enrichment in terms of getting the messaging right. In terms of quality control, so it's super important, this stuff, that a human reviews it at some point, right? Because you don't want AI just going off on its own and drafting all these outbound messages. Even if it's mirroring the language that the inbound sales leads use, that you converted, it's still going to get some stuff wrong. It's going to sound too generic. It's going to have like M dashes, it's just stuff that you want to avoid. So what you want to do is basically get AI to generate the first batch, send those to you, you review them, and you go, okay, I like these, I don't like these. And then basically just repeat this a couple times till like you're happy with all the ones you get back. And then you do the bulk. But once you have that set up, then it's pretty reasonably robust. You just get it to send you a sample potentially every couple of days, just to keep an eye on it. But it's relatively robust in terms of it won't make you sound too terrible as a company and burn all your leads, So for an example, chat here with OpenClaw. Here's a high poster example, posting 12 times a month on LinkedIn takes real commitment. Keeping quality consistent at that pace is the hard part. And I updated it just to basically make the language sound a small bit more human, or particular to that particular business. And then it will update the phrasing for all the 56 high poster leads in the CSV. Basically, all the leads that post kind of 10 to 20 times a month that we have in our lead list. And then it will have that saved for future reference, right? So this is just prompting back and forth. So I don't need to be technical at all to set this up. It's just an hour or two of like back and forth. And it works super well. So in terms of the voice of the customer, super important. I referenced this a minute ago, but you basically want to export your call transcripts and your CRM data, feed that into the AI so that it can basically figure out the languages that your customers use. And then it can, you obviously want to get the important sales things around like recurring pains, trigger signals, desired outcomes, objections, all that stuff. And then you basically want to output that into a master doc that acts like, this is the profile, this is like the soul of the AI agent that's going to be doing this work. And then it can use that to basically draft messages on the fly to your customers. So essentially, in summary, right, this is a relatively technical kind of sales go-to-market talk, but it's actually kind of simple conceptually, right? So you're looking at the foundation is some sort of a CRM where you have your call transcripts and you have all your lead information. You want to use something to find lookalikes. So say that's Apollo. You want to obviously enrich the data, emails, phone numbers if you want. Some sort of an external data source just to enrich the data further and give you a kind of differentiator compared to this more generic outbound they're going to be receiving. And essentially, OpenClaw or Claude can actually handle the copywriting as long as you're making sure that you're quality controlling it, which is the next step down here. And then once you're happy enough, get the mass updated and goes out. And what you can do is you can set this up so to say for every time you get basically convert a sale to your business, to your SaaS or whatever, depending on your scale and everything like this. But every time you get a new sale, you find 50 lookalikes, and then they automatically get drafted a message as an outbound campaign based on the language that the new sale used when they were coming inbound to you. And it's super low effort way just start scaling your sales engine small, but maybe when you're resource constrained, or maybe just run this in parallel to an actual BDR and see which gets better results. Because we found that like there's actually very little difference between the results this gets versus an actual human BDR. Obviously, human BDR has certain advantages over having an AI agent doing stuff for you. But at the end of the day, like it comes down to budget and what's the where we're spending our euros versus how much revenue we're generating. And this is pretty competitive. And obviously scales kind of infinitely in theory. Yeah, and then just as an example is, so you can obviously set this up so it's fed in automatically. In this case, I can throw in, we were targeting some IT MSPs with our product, and I can get the sales transcripts and the onboarding notes from that person. It can go off, it figures stuff out. All I need to do is provide some API keys, and then it builds up the pipeline, verifies the emails itself, and then sends me across some of the targets and some of the emails for review. I mentioned this at the start, but yeah, with Claude is kind of expensive. So you'll be paying potentially more than $100 a week to run this, up to a couple $100 a week, depending on your scale. Like our scale isn't huge with this, so it's like a couple hundred leads a week we were processing. So obviously if you scale that to like thousands of leads, it's going to come thousands of dollars. Switch to a different model, relatively straightforward to do, and you can kind of like reduce your costs potentially by like 10 times lower, depending on the exact amount. So yeah, makes it a lot more cost efficient. Then obviously, it's, if you're in the scale business, it's a nice one. So yeah, in total, costing about $360. Set this up day one, and then with the model change, about $188 a month. Kind of keep going after that. And that's basically it. As a bonus, we have a very similar thing running a daily CRM sweep for us. So I will just basically be working on my CRM for the day. I'll bang stuff into a Google Doc freeform, and because this is linked into our Atio, I basically just paste that into our AI agent at the end of the day, and it updates my CRM for me as opposed to me having to update as I'm going, which is also super useful for sales. Yeah, that's the thing. Real quick, our business goes to AI. What we do is we write social media content for businesses. If you're interested in that, reach out to me. If the talk was interesting, give me some feedback on it. And yeah, thanks very much for watching, for listening, and hopefully I'll talk to you very soon.